I saw this one last time, Do Flamethrowers Belong in the Library by Kenz Ross, and I got very curious about that, so let's read that. It is the contest winner for contest number 211. It's got 217 likes, 174 comments, so this one's buzzing. And it's not, this one's a bit of a reader. And none of these short stories I've read. I'm reading these blind on stream just for fun because it's October. Let's read some spooky stories together that I haven't seen, maybe you guys haven't heard yet. Get some exposure on some of these authors. These short stories are on readsy.com. It's a blog I recently discovered with a ton of short stories written by authors. All right. We lose people all the time. It's just the nature of the job. What can you expect from a place full of nooks and crannies people intentionally go to get lost in? I usually don't worry when I don't see someone for a while, but when it's been days since someone's checked out, it's usually a sign that I need to step in. I'm not doing this alone, thankfully. No librarian is ever truly alone, are they? I have help from the watchers and listeners of the shelves. Thanks to them, it usually doesn't take long to get the scent, if you know what I mean. However, today is one of the rare and unfortunate exceptions when my search has exceeded more than an hour, and an hour is pushing it. I've been searching and asking around for almost 6 hours, scouring shelves and listening for the telltale breathing. The watchers have their quadrants, though it's much like playing hot and cold. "Bad news," one says, and my brain shivers in my skull, both from its existence and its statement. "They crossed the tape," says the watcher, and I groan. "Are you sure?" My stomach still drops at the thought, even though I've been doing this a very long time. Long enough that I remember every book on every shelf better than my own child's face. But knowing a poor soul lost themselves beyond the tape, I grieve for them. The watcher doesn't speak, but generates an affirmative sensation. That means I have to backtrack to my desk for supplies. I thank them, asking that they send word ahead of my arrival. It's been a while since I've had to go past the tape, which means it's been a while since I entered the broom closet. The helmet is dusty. It looks almost like it's from one of those old-fashioned scuba diving suits. It's not nearly so heavy, though. There's a bright lamp affixed to the front just above the visor, but it's as much of a hindrance as a help. While most of the time, those beyond the tape know not to bother me, some still get bored enough to try, and the lamp acts like a beacon. I don't blame them. It's what prisoners do. Find the weakest among them and test their mettle. I've got a sack full of non-perishables, tinctures, aspirin, and a compass. Not like the kind you're used to, but would take too long to explain, and time is of the essence, so I'll let your imagination handle it from here. I sling the sack across my body and fasten my waist with a utility belt that would make a trust fund bat character with abandonment issues jealous. It's got floss, lighters, matches, and a few more tools that don't exist outside the library. The last thing I grab is the flamethrower. This is where I should be very transparent with you. I'm not actually the librarian. I'm the librarian's assistant. I know, isn't that just your luck, right? Not to worry, I'm very good at using this thing, and it does the job nicely. Whatever job I may deem necessary at any particular moment. But the head librarian doesn't really need much of anything to ward off what lingers here. I don't know exactly where he is at the moment, nor do I want to know. If this were a real pickle, I would summon him. But while a rare occasion, it's not unusual in the scope of 1,000 years. After all, no one comes here without the intention, whether it's conscious or subconscious, to get lost. It's the nature of this place. But you know that, don't you? That's why you're here, after all. It doesn't take me long to find the tape, which is fortuitous. Sometimes it moves around, but the watchers and listeners keep a beat on it this time so as to direct me. Yes, it is really dark. Yes, it's literal tape. Hazard tape, but that's almost like a beacon to the adventurous, isn't it? I think the library knows that. It's greedy, but it's also quite discerning in taste. In some circles, that means I should extend congratulations to you. In others, I offer my sincerest sympathy. I hear my name and ignore it as I crawl through the crisscross of reflective strips. The tape moves not at random, by the way. It genuinely serves as a warning. Whether it's gatekeeping sections currently under construction, in repair, or missing. I try not to, but I think that last one has something to do with where the head librarian went. Don't worry about it. My name is not important. So ineffectual that I've forgotten. I hear my name again as I begrudgingly turn on the lamp. Not a lot of help, just enough light to ensure I don't trip over anything or disturb the shelves. Many sleep here. I send off a warning shot from the flamethrower, showing I carry more light than just atop my appetizing head. The flash of flames sends things slithering. But most of those this close to the tape have never been very convicted by nature, so I'm not concerned. There are more listeners and less watchers past the tape, for obvious reasons. Thankfully, they say I don't have to go too far. I look down at the telling clicking sound to see rocks rolling. Some as big as my foot, and some as small as the tip of my thumb. The smaller ones move more easily, but all are rolling as if pulled toward a central point. I don't even need the compass, but I glance down at it one more time before stuffing it back into the sack. While I don't have to go too far, things are relative here. 10 steps may be 10,000, and so even after only a few moments of exploring, I feel acute pressure jamming into my temples. My heart feels like it's being squeezed, and my vision blurs. My fingers tingle by the time I'm able to shake the aspirin into my mouth. I chew it, ignoring the sound of my name, my true name. The one only I can hear. You'll hear your own as well, if you stay here long enough. My vision clears, which just means the dark looks sharper, and I sweep another warning arc from the flamethrower for good measure. I do this as much because I love the sound as for protection. I also appreciate the warmth. It gets cold here, but in a strange way, which shouldn't surprise you at this point. It's cold like how the first signs of spring show in the early morning dew that's only just melted. I can smell and taste the sweat on my upper lip, and it's cold. And then I hear it. A few or 1,000 steps later. The breathing sound I've been listening for. The pace of the rock quickens, and my head is turned down so the helmet light prevents me from tripping over or impeding their journey. A famous author once said, "All things serve the beam," and that's as true in this world as it is in the others, except this beam, this beacon, is attached to our lost visitor. I can only hear the rocks, mumblings, and the breathing sound now. The smell is so musty and thick, like the air is full of sweat and dust, like I've stuck my head out the window during a heavily falling rain. If I think hard enough about it, soon I'll be drenched, so I don't. While the rocks are almost the perfect tell, the listeners too corroborates the evidence. You can never be too sure. Only light can be sure. I take a match from the tiny box, snap it to life, and then blow it out. Tiny smoke tendrils curl and waft until they also follow the same flow as the rocks. Excellent. We've not been led astray. A few or 1,000 more steps, and the rocks are gathering down an aisle where the breathing is more like wheezing, like the desperate struggle to take in. Lo and behold, we found them. Poor thing. Judging by the state of her, she got lost early. She's likely been here for most of the day. The book covers her face, consuming her head like a kid on a particularly large popsicle. The pages flutter gently against her too white jaw. The papery quality of her skin and the wanting muscle mass show little time was on our side. Not a moment to waste. I grab the book by the edges of both back and front covers. It's got most of her head inside at this point. Just her earlobes, hair, and edge of her jaw peek out from beneath the pages I now grip firmly. The wheezing turns into a moan that turns into a sob. Now, I say, and test the hold the book has on its victim. It's snug, too snug to yank like a leech. I need to treat it like a tick, making sure to get the head out. None of these are intended as puns, but it just happens after being surrounded by books and prose for so long. I draw one of the tiny vials strapped in my utility belt and pull the cork out. It smells like nothing to me, but I see the reaction immediately. Our half-consumed explorer moves a bit, her fingers mostly, and I hear a second, tinier moan beneath that of the books. I pour a small amount of the substance into the palm of my hand, and I smooth it gently down the spine of the book. It wails again, and so does the girl, both full of sorrow and reluctance. I feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, so I turn at the hip, cock the flamethrower, and send off a very intentionally long tail of flames. When the feeling subsides, I shrug the weapon back over my shoulder. I use the backs of two knuckles to knock gently on the book cover. It's time to come back now. My apologies, I say, and I mean it. The book and the girl moan again, more hollowly, and I can feel the seal, the bond, splitting like a seam. I grip the book again, because these two are stubborn and have to pry them apart. The color and mass return beneath her skin, and though her eyes are open, I can't see anything. She'll be like that for a while. It's normal. She'll recover. I pour the remaining contents of the bottle down the part of her frazzled blonde hair. Tears fill the empty eyes and drip down her face. Her mouth presses into a thin white line and grimaces so intensely the flesh folds in multiple layers at the corners of her mouth. Great pain. Even after 1,000 years, I still can't help but feel sorry. So I pull her burning head under my chin and rub circles into her back. I'm sorry, dear. I know you've been told otherwise, but this place is a prison. And that isn't your story. Yours is still being written. And the one which made you pretty promises is lying and jealous. One day, if the world is cruel, may yet have a place here. One day you, if the world is cruel, may yet have a place here. But it's not today. So let's go and have a cup of tea, I tell her, as I've told many like her. I've gotten better at it over the years. I used to have to fight with them. Often I'd give up and just keep them safe until the head librarian got back to talk them down. She finally lets out a weak, wheezing breath. I take advantage of the broken seam of her lips and pour a tincture down her throat. I don't even have to look anymore. I can just feel the specific melodies that make each tincture different. It helps that the one I need usually sings a bit louder as a courtesy, and it'll purr like a cat when I've touched my fingers to it. She chokes a bit, but her eyes start to clear. Good enough for now. The back of my neck has another sudden influx of goosebumps. We've overstayed our welcome. It's time to go. I put the book back on the shelf. I don't scold it, just allow its ache and frustration flow through me. I apologize, but there's no comfort I can give. My words and compassion are meaningless. I've noted the volume and will tell the head librarian. They might be able to soothe it back to sleep. I tap the metal bauble around my neck, and we're back at my desk. I drape the girl onto a nearby love seat that's seen better days, starting the kettle before heading to the broom closet to stash the emergency kit. She'll be fine. People like her, and you, always are. This place was made to help the wanderers and recklessly imaginative, those who can't wrap their heads around the world the way it is, and can see the truth of magic between heartbeats and heartbreaks. And people like me and the head librarian, when they so choose to grace us with their presence, keep the place orderly and open for you. And we're here to help guide you back on track if you lose inspiration for your own story. It's the nature of the job, the library itself. What else can you expect from a place full of nooks and crannies that people choose to get lost in? That was a whirlwind, winding adventure. Well, first off, I loved that short story. That was a fantastic read. I can tell why it was a winner for sure. And again, it's one of those short stories, or stories in general, that really has you thinking after, at the end of it. It doesn't have, it's not strictly plot driven. It's not reliant on action, right, or set pieces. Not overly reliant anyway. It's not overly reliant on twists and plot contrivances and things like that. It's focused on the feeling and the art of just telling a story. And throughout the story, our understanding of where we are and what's happening just constantly evolves. And that's another thing I really like about a well-told story, is that your perception of things will regularly evolve. It doesn't have to be all the time, but especially for a short story. I mean, obviously it's got to be snappier than a novel or a novella that has a lot more words that it can use. So I like that when we first start, we see terms like the librarian, things like that, and hearing the term library or librarian obviously gives you an initial first impression of just, it's a library. Okay, we're dealing with a library. Someone's gotten lost in the library. This is obviously someone whose job it is to help someone help someone who gets lost in the library. Obviously, even though we haven't necessarily been told that there's anything special about this library, we're already given clues that this is likely no ordinary library, right? Just by the opening the fact that people are getting lost and that this is a normal occurrence, that this isn't a normal situation. This isn't a normal library. This isn't a non-fiction situation we're in. So there's something fantastical happening here. And then we hear about the watchers and the listeners. And what I really like is that we're never explicitly told exactly what is a watcher, exactly what is a listener. They're never described. We're just given a couple bits of information about the purpose, or how the point of view character, our main character, interacts and uses the watchers and listeners. And from there, the reader is meant to infer or fill in the gaps with their own imagination. I like that with the watchers, we have a couple lines from a watcher. We have a couple... Gotta get some tea, man. I'm thirsty. We have a couple lines from the watcher. We have a couple little bits of information about what a watcher, but we really don't know what the watchers are, right? Like, are they spirits? Things like that. But I think by the end of it, and this is another story, this is another type of story that once you get to the end of it, your perception of what's really going on has changed so much, has evolved so much, that it really begs for a second or even a third read. This is something that I feel like I would want to read a couple more times to fully form what I think is happening here, and to really dive in and fully interpret maybe the author's intentions, which is always a fun thing to do. So that's a very successful short story. What I think, by the time we got to the very end, it really feels like the library seems to be an analogy for our own headspace, for our own muddled creative headspace, as creatives, as storytellers or developers, whatever type of creative you are, but especially with storytellers, we do tend to get lost in the library of our own thoughts and ideas. And sometimes it could be like that one person who got lost and the book is stuck on her head and the main character is telling her, this isn't your story. You know, you think it is, this story told you lies, but this isn't your story. So I'm kind of thinking that might be the interpretation, that might be the takeaway here, is that this is kind of like a letter for creatives and other storytellers of like, hey, yeah, it's easy to get lost in the library of your own ideas and stories, and sometimes when we get lost, we can't move forward, we can't progress. We can't actually make progress on our own stories and our own projects and things like that, because we're stuck in a limbo state. So that's one interpretation. There could be another interpretation. There could be a more broader interpretation outside of just the creative headspace. But I definitely think at the end it's implying that this is more of an analogy for someone's own personal journey within their mind, I think. Let's see what the reviews have to say. This one has quite a few comments on it. Kenz Ross has 2 submissions. Let's go check out real quick what his other story is. My luck, it's running out. Submitted to contest 180. Didn't win that time. Only had 17 likes and 9 comments. But hey, I like his writing style too. I like Ken's writing style very much. It had a lot of character and personality, and I believe that some of the most successful stories will have a strong voice in the narrative. I've read a lot of stories, unfortunately, that have a dry voice to them, have a very sterile, by the numbers, this is what's happening, beat by beat type of voice. There's no character, there's no personality to it. And putting a voice into your prose can be very difficult. It just depends. You just have to kind of trust yourself to let your voice come through in your writing. And I think Kenz did that just beautifully. here. You get a very strong sense of the voice of the narrative, but also not just any voice, especially the voice of the main character. Obviously it's first person, so that's going to be a lot easier to do in first person, but you'd be surprised how many people who write in first person or choose to write in first person don't really take full advantage of getting in character in the first person. When you write in first person, even if you're writing in third person, but especially if you're writing in first person, you can really push it when it comes to, and you should push it when it comes to personalizing the narrative here. And I think Kenz did that great. 174 comments. Let's take a look at a few. Spilled Ink says, man, I wish there was a whole universe with this magical library at the center. I'd love to read more about what exactly the head librarian and his assistant's jobs entail. Truly great work. So Spilled Ink, I think, took a more literal interpretation of it and said, oh, this is an actual thing. People are getting called here and they get lost, and I want to know more about this world, this build out. And that's not a bad interpretation. You know what this reminds me of too, reading Spilled Ink's comment and reading this short story? This is very familiar to some movies. One of my favorite films, The Labyrinth, has a very similar take from audiences, where some audiences take the Sarah's adventure into the labyrinth literally, that she actually went to a goblin city and saved her baby brother Toby from the Goblin King, David Bowie. And others, like me, believe it's more analogous, and it's more of like it's an in-her-head journey. And I really feel like the movie is giving that away right from the jump, but especially at the end, you know, that these events aren't real. But then it's interesting to me when I see everybody else try to expand the world of the labyrinth as though it is a living, breathing thing and it is real. And I'm like, well, no. To me personally, it just doesn't work to expand the world, because it works because this is a story about Sarah's personal growth from bratty, spoiled teenager who's inconsiderate of others and selfish and unkind to maturing into adulthood, becoming an adult, and what that means. And obviously part of it means becoming less selfish, being more considerate and kind of others, learning to be responsible for others, learning to put the needs of others first before yours. But also the scary parts of it, the parts of the unknown, scary world of adults, you know, as seen in the ballroom dance with David Bowie, you know, all the scary little goblin masks and things like that, you know. So to me, it just doesn't work to expand it, because the movie is so written beautifully about a girl going through maturity and navigating that coming of age, you know. I think something similar here. I don't know if I would personally want anything expanded. It is a beautiful world that's briefly told as far as like, oh, this is an interesting concept. But I think to me it's far more interesting because at the very end it seems to imply it's analogous and more of something that is meant to represent our personal struggle in our minds. I think I could be dead wrong. So Kenz Ross actually applies that apparently he's been planning something. So this was back, this was last year, a year ago. Maybe he is planning on expanding that. K. Smith says, I'm so glad I read the story. This is fantastic writing. All things serve the beam. A well-deserved win. Congratulations. Suma Jayashandar, hope I said that right, says, I can feel the seal, the bond, splitting like a seam. I grip the book again because these two are stubborn and have to pry them apart. I'm sure every ardent reader can relate to some part of it. To serve up a fantasy that feels so real is no mean task. Brilliant work. Congratulations. Yeah, absolutely. The way Ken's depicted the story without getting too detailed about it, and this is the thing, I see a lot of newer authors over the past 10 years writing very literally, and I catch myself doing it too. I'm not the best writer either. Writing very literally of like, oh, they went and they opened the door and they walked here, or they ran here, and then they did this and then they did that. Like, it's like a checklist of things they did. But Kenz does something remarkable, like the others have done before him in the short stories, where he doesn't have to get that detailed. He just implies these things, and your head, the reader's imagination fills in the rest, because we don't need all of this detail. We don't need to know every little piece of detail, every little piece of action. We can fill in the gaps ourselves, and also relates back to eliciting emotions from your reader. One of the things that I also talk about a lot is that, you can definitely try to influence your reader to have a certain emotion with word choice. That's really one of the few things you can do outside of making sure you build a specific sequence of story blocks that should lead up to a certain emotional moment, right? But at the end of the day, no matter what you do, no matter how you write your story, you can't force an emotion onto a reader. You can't. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what word choice you use, although, word choice does matter. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't with regards to controlling how the reader's going to interact with your story. I know as creatives and authors, we want readers to interact with our story the way we imagine them interacting with when we're writing. It's like, oh, this is going to be a sad moment. I hope readers are going to be sad with me as I'm writing this. Or, oh, I want this reader to hate this character. Oh, I want this reader to love this character. That's how I'm going to write them. But you don't get to decide what relationship that reader is going to have with your book or its characters. Or what relationship your reader is going to have with the story anyway, and its characters. You don't. It doesn't matter. Not saying it, you can't do a really good job of getting them there, and you can, but you can't 100% control it. So at the end of the day, you just want to make sure that you put in enough detail and word choice and things like that to help suggest or imply. But at the end of the day, the reader's going to have their own relationship. They're going to fill in the gaps with that. And they may hate the character that you think they're going to love. They may love the character you think they're going to hate. Every reader's going to have their own personal interpretation, because we have our own built-in personal biases, our own personal built-in history that has influenced our perceptions of the world, right? And that's going to have an effect on how we, take in the story and how we form relationships with it. So that's just something to keep in mind too, with regards to how much detail you need to put in there. And the more detail you put into your book, the harder it is, I find personally, to have a strong voice. Just my personal experience. The more detailed you get, I feel like the harder it is to find a true, authentic voice. Pulling back, I think this is a good example right here. I know there's a few others, but it's just like, hey, I draped the girl onto a lovely love seat that's seen better days. We don't need to know how detailed. We don't need to know the color of the love seat. We don't need to know if it's dusty or marred or tarnished. That seen better days already implies so much. Our head fills the rest. Starting the kettle, I don't need to know that he's making tea. I don't need to know that he went to the kitchen, or I don't need to know that there's a little stove top to the side. It doesn't matter. That detail doesn't matter. What matters, the important part, is the action that he went to start a kettle. And it could be a kettle of anything, but we all know that when we hear the word kettle, we assume tea. So he's going to make tea before heading to the broom closet. So he goes to the broom closet. There's a stashed emergency kit. He doesn't have to tell us where this broom closet is. He doesn't have to tell us that he opened the door, anything like that. He just lets us know high level, like he's talking to somebody, like he's talking to us. like, yeah, so I was with my mom the other day, and she was feeling kind of weak when we stood up after lunch, so I went ahead and sat her on the love seat, and that thing's been beat up, and I went ahead and made her some tea, and meanwhile went ahead and put up her purse over on the coat hanger. I didn't. That's how you would kind of relate a general story to people, and I think that can be an effective approach to storytelling in general for the most part. You're giving in what details are necessary for you to understand what's going on, but not going above and beyond. Wow, says Benja Cotton. This was engrossing and transporting as Piranesi. Just much shorter, impressive, and so fun. Aaron Von Kahl says, "Oh my gosh, this is so good. I really, really love your idea. I would 100% read this if it were made into a full movie. Wow, you are so good at writing. I love how you turn the simple setting of a library into a whimsical and mysterious place made to represent life and everyone's individual story, and how sometimes we can become so absorbed in the search for meaning within our own lives that we become lost." I think Aaron gets it. It reminds me of the Pixar movie Soul, in which the lost souls represent the ways people become consumed by their own minds. You had me enthralled. That's a perfect example by Aaron. And you know what? To be honest, I think Aaron's interpretation is probably correct. More correct than what I thought. I thought maybe the story might have been more focused on the struggle of creatives, but like I suggested before, it could even be broader than that, and I think Aaron hit the nail on the head beautifully here. That it probably is very broad, and it's probably very similar to how Pixar's Soul represented that very same aspect. Which, by the way, one of my favorite movies. I love Soul. Let's see what Kenz wrote about that. "Oh my God, I'm so glad that you enjoyed it. Your kind words are so inspiring and humbling. It means so much that my story was something you could connect with. Thank you so much." I was hoping Kenz would maybe confirm that interpretation. He did not. Like a good author should. Just keep the mystery. Don't give us all the answers. We don't need all the answers. Some things need to stay a mystery, because that's what makes it interesting, is the unknown. Once you explain the thing, it becomes less interesting. The mystery is the exciting part.